The airport was buzzing with travelers dragging suitcases, rolling strollers, and rushing toward gates, until one voice rose above the noise, sharp enough to slice through the air. Mark, her ex-husband, leaned back with a laugh that carried across the terminal, pointing at Emma's faded suitcase and the cardigan she'd worn almost every winter since their marriage ended. "Still the same old Emma," he mocked, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. His new partner, Claire, gave a tight smile that wasn't loud, but was somehow even more cutting as she murmured, "Some people never move forward." Emma didn't flinch. She stood there with a calm so steady it unsettled Mark more than he'd admit. She looked as though she knew something he didn't, as though the moment belonged to her and not to his mockery. Around them, the chatter dimmed as more eyes shifted toward the tension thickening between them. And then, just as Mark opened his mouth to continue, the entire airport seemed to pause. Footsteps approached Emma from behind, firm, purposeful, and carrying a presence that made even the gate agents look up. Whoever it was, Mark's smug expression faltered, just slightly, as if some buried part of him sensed that everything he thought he knew about Emma was about to collapse. What happened next would become one of those stories people retell to strangers because the shift in the air was impossible to ignore. Emma didn't turn around immediately. She closed her eyes for the briefest second, as if steadying herself for something huge, something long overdue. Mark's voice cracked when he tried to laugh again, but the sound came out uneasy, confused, almost afraid. Claire's hand slipped off his arm. Travelers slowed their steps, whispering, wondering who was approaching this woman so confidently in the middle of a public humiliation. Emma finally lifted her head, and the calm in her eyes was no longer unsettling. It was powerful. It was the look of someone who had already healed from wounds her ex-husband still believed he had the power to reopen. Before the revelation unfolded, before the truth reached Mark in a way he never expected, the airport held its breath, as if bracing for the moment that would change everything. And as you listen to this story, ask yourself, how would you feel if someone tried to shame you in public only to realize you were no longer the person they thought you were? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Her name was Anna, though for years, Mark treated that name as if it held no weight at all. Anyone watching her now, standing quiet, steady, almost unrecognizable from the woman she once was, would never imagine the sacrifices she carried in her past. Before their marriage collapsed, she had worked late nights and early mornings to support him through school, taking extra shifts so he wouldn't have to. She set aside her own dream of opening a small design studio, telling herself there would be time later, once his life was settled. But instead of gratitude, she received criticism. Mark called her unambitious, told her she lacked drive, said she should be grateful. He stayed with her at all. Each insult chipped away at the version of Anna who tried so hard to keep the marriage alive. By the time the divorce papers were signed, she had nothing left except a determination she didn't yet know would become her greatest strength. What he never realized was that the woman standing in front of him now was no longer the woman he abandoned. Mark, on the other hand, carried himself with a confidence that looked polished on the outside, but hollowed out on the inside. He had always been charismatic, the type who entered a room expecting it to adjust to him, but beneath that charm lived an insecurity he fought to hide. Beside him stood Lila, elegant and sharply dressed, the sort of person who measured others silently and found them lacking without needing to say a word. For her, moments like this were opportunities to display superiority. For him, they were confirmations that he'd chosen the better path. They believed Anna was the past he had risen above, a reminder he no longer had to respect. This airport encounter was the first time they'd seen her in years, and Mark walked into it ready to flaunt everything he thought she didn't have. He believed he had won, that life had validated every decision he made, But what neither Mark nor Lila knew was that Anna had rebuilt herself far from their view. She had risen quietly, shaping a life that didn't need their approval. And while they stood there convinced they understood who she was, the truth was waiting just moments ahead. Mark had no idea what she had built in the shadows. Anna had spent years pretending she was fine, but the truth was that the foundation of her life cracked long before Mark walked out the door. She remembered the day he left with painful clarity, the quiet thud of the door closing, the cold silence afterward, and her knees giving out on the kitchen floor. She cried until her voice faded, until the walls felt too close, until she realized that no one was coming to pick her up. There were nights she stared at unpaid bills spread across the table, wondering how a person could feel so abandoned while still breathing. She forced herself to take double shifts at a diner that smelled of burnt coffee, working through exhaustion that made her vision blur. Yet in that painful season, something fragile began forming deep within her. It was small, barely noticeable at first, but real. It was the understanding that losing everything had strangely created space for her to discover, who slowly she realized she had to choose between staying broken or rebuilding from the ground up. And so, with trembling hands and a heart that still hurt, Anna enrolled in business courses at the community college. She sat in the back row at first, afraid someone would see how unsure she felt. At night, she took additional classes, often studying under the warm hum of a flickering kitchen light that barely worked. She also volunteered at a women's empowerment group, at first to listen, then eventually to speak. She found comfort among people who understood hardship, people who didn't see her as a failure. Bit by bit, she started a small consulting service from her living room, using a second-hand laptop and a phone that barely held a charge. Her confidence didn't return in a dramatic rush. It came in small, consistent pieces, like sunlight slipping through curtains after a long winter. As months turned into years, her work began to attract attention. Not loud, flashy attention, but the kind that builds quietly, steadily, and with real respect. Clients recommended her to their colleagues, and those colleagues recommended her further. She helped small businesses restructure, guided young women through career changes, and built a network that grew far beyond her original circle. Her purpose, once buried beneath years of being told she wasn't enough, took shape in a way that felt both grounding and liberating. She wasn't simply recovering anymore, she was rising. She attended conferences, presented workshops, and earned certifications that once felt impossible. Every new step added another layer to her rebuilt identity, one that no longer relied on anyone's approval. And perhaps the most surprising part was how natural it felt. This new life, this steady rise, this quiet belief that she deserved more than what she'd lived through. But the turning point, the moment her life shifted from rebuilding to achieving, came unexpectedly. A major figure in the business world stumbled across one of her published guides online. He contacted her personally, impressed by her clarity, her strategy, and her ability to simplify complex challenges. From that single message came an invitation to collaborate on high-level community development projects, the type usually reserved for people with years of influence and connections. Anna accepted, hesitant at first, but ready to try. What followed was a series of partnerships, leadership roles, and opportunities she once believed were out of reach. She traveled, consulted for major organizations, and built a reputation rooted in integrity and resilience. Her financial life stabilized, her emotional life strengthened, and her social circle expanded into spaces she never imagined she'd enter. Yet through all this success, she remained quiet, private, intentional, never broadcasting her accomplishments. People who worked with her admired her, but they rarely knew her full story. They didn't know about the kitchen floor, or the double shifts, or the nights she questioned her worth. They only saw a poised, capable woman whose calm confidence didn't need to be announced to be felt. She carried herself with a softness that came from understanding pain and strength, a calmness that made her presence feel grounded. Even as her projects grew, she never forgot where she started or the promises she made to herself. To move forward without bitterness, to succeed without stepping on others, and to never allow disrespect in her life again. Those who met her saw a woman who spoke with purpose, who listened before she answered, and who worked with a quiet fire. But there was still one part of her journey hidden from everyone, one accomplishment even her closest colleagues did not yet know.